Hello, everybody. This is the Sea Level Rise Response Collaborative Executive Committee meeting. Today is Friday, August 5th, and it is noon, our new meeting time. My name is Danny Madrone. I'm the chair from the City of Olympia, and we also have Vice Chair Bob Ayal from the Port, and also committee member Lietta Dahlhoff from the City of Tumwater. I did hear from Chris Peters of the Squaxin Island Tribe, who is very, very grateful that we changed the meeting time. And today is the first salmon ceremony for the Squaxin Island Tribe, so he's unable to make it, but he's excited to come to the next meeting. So we just need to approve our agenda. Could I get a motion to do so, please?
So moved. This is Lietta.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor? Aye.
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 Excellent. All right. And then approval of the minutes. We last met on May 26th. Could I please get a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting?
I will motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting.
I will second.
Excellent. All in favor? Aye.
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 All right, with that fun stuff out of the way, we did have a couple of people sign up for public comment, but I do not see them in the attendee list. So I am actually going to go ahead and just move on from that straight into committee business. We have one item for business here, and that is to talk about some of the budget items that were discussed at our last meeting. And so I'm going to pass it over to Eric to bring some context, and then we could talk about that.
Are you able to see my screen at this time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Give me just 1 second to get myself adjusted. So at our last meeting, we discussed potential budget requests for the various members. They included a few priority items like purchase of a tide gauge for installation at the port, a satellite survey for land subsidence, an initial preliminary groundwater study, and coordination with FEMA and the Corps of Engineers. And we placed some values on those future projects and proposed an allocation to the various members, the City of Olympia, the Lot Clean Water Alliance, and the Port of Olympia. At that time, we requested, understanding that we're in the process of developing our budgets, we requested that each member give consideration to those items, and we were just wanting to know whether that consideration has been given and whether we can plan on having some funding in 2023 to move forward with these priority projects.
All right, thank you so much, Eric. And so Lietta and Bob, have you had a chance to check in with your respective organizations?
Well, I'll jump in there, Lietta, if you don't mind. I have checked in with the other commissioners and let them know this is coming. We're actually starting our budget planning here for 2023 in the next few weeks. I think maybe it's the first or second week of September. We'll be having our work session on just specifically for the budget. So they know it's coming, and we'll officially make that request, like I said, the second week in September.
Excellent. And you will fiercely advocate for it, correct?
I don't really see any objection for it.
Yeah, I just had to check. How about you, Lietta? And I realize I introduced you as being from the City of Olympia, but you are representing Lot in that role. I'm sorry, Tumwater.
I was like, wait, what?
No, yeah. So were you able to check in at Lot?
Yes, Lisa Dennis Perez, who's also on this call today, and Matt are here, and they confirm that the status with law is that the requested $50,000 has been included in the draft 2023-2024 budget.
Excellent. And you will also help fiercely advocate for that, correct?
Of course.
Thank you so much. All right. So Eric, is there anything else that you need from the committee here in this regard? We've had our check-in. It sounds like things are moving forward.
No motion is necessary. It was just a discussion to understand whether the plan is to move forward with the funding. So we're in good shape.
All right, great. That brings us to reports and updates, and there's a few different things here. Do you want to go ahead and stop sharing your screen, Eric?
Sure, I can do that.
The first update is that we did have letters sent to the county and the Department of Enterprise Services regarding ex officio participation. And Eric, do you have an update from the county or DES?
I do not. I've not received any correspondence in regards to the invitation.
Okay. I did see Ty not long ago, and I know the county is interested, though he was unavailable for this meeting time, and he will likely be the representative there. So I know that there is interest from the county. At a certain point, we might want to nudge the Department of Enterprise Services on that, and just catch their attention since they're a critical stakeholder in all of this. Any questions on that, Leetta or Bob?
No, none from me.
Okay, great. Well, hopefully at the next meeting, we'll at least have somebody from the county joining us. And then Eric, I see here that you've got the video series promoting the promoted in the 5 things. Do you want to talk about that? Give some context.
Yeah, I just wanted to make you aware that the award-winning video documentary series put together has been promoted in the City of Olympia's utility insert, what we call our 5 things. And it was also put out in our e-newsletter, letting people know that it's out there.
Okay, excellent. And I also know that there's a couple other things coming out in terms of just raising public awareness around this work. And one is that Rich Hoy is working on a blog post from that will be on the Olympia's newish blog with a lot of information for the public to understand the work that we're doing here. And also MRSC is going to be putting out, I did a written interview with them. So they're also going to be putting something out. So just getting the word out. And then other reports and updates. I see that we have 2 briefings listed here, one on physical adaptation strategies and one on funding strategies for adaptation. So Eric, would you like to share on those?
Yeah, I'll launch into those. I do have a presentation. I'll share my screen again if that's okay.
Yep.
Okay. Given that we have some new members, we wanted to go over our physical adaptation strategies as proposed in the Olympia Sea Level Rise response plan. The plan identified 4 key focus areas within downtown. The first being Capitol Lake or the Deschutes, Lower Deschutes watershed. The second being Purcell Landing in the Isthmus. The third being the Bud Inlet Treatment Plant, and the fourth being the Port of Olympia Peninsula. The first area of focus, as I mentioned, is Capitol Lake and Heritage Park. Capitol Lake is where downtown is most vulnerable to flooding currently. With existing conditions without sea level rise. As this image depicts, this is without any sea level rise. There's a significant flood hazard zone associated with Capitol Lake. The next focus area was Percival Landing in the Isthmus. Those areas are depicted here with 6 inches of sea level rise, which shows we will have significant vulnerability at that time. The third area was the Port of Olympia. It's depicted here with 24 inches of sea level rise. The port is not vulnerable until greater sea level rise than the other areas of downtown. And the fourth focus area was the Bud Inlet Treatment Plant and the associated combined sewer system. Marine water entering the combined sewer system could have the potential of overwhelming the hydraulic capacity of the plant and killing the biologic activity. It also poses the risk of releasing untreated sewage and backing sewage up into the streets of downtown. The treatment plant itself realizes the risk of flooding at 18 inches of sea level rise. And the associated risks, of course, are damage to structures and equipment and processes, and also the potential release of untreated sewage to Bud Inlet. In the process of developing this sea level rise response plan, adaptation strategies were identified by looking at other cities and other locations across the country to identify the strategies that were relevant for Olympia. The strategies were categorized into 3 categories that were combined into integrated plans for the 4 focus areas. Temporary flood protection measures can be deployed at key locations to address infrequent and short duration flooding events. Some temporary measures include, some temporary measures would automatically deploy, such as pop-up floodgates, while others, such as sandbags or street grate seals, require the work of crews at the time of an emergency. The second category were living with water strategies. These accommodate floodwaters and lessen their impact and help avoid exposure. Living shorelines, floodable landscapes, and green infrastructure are examples of living with water strategies. Wet and dry flood proofing are also strategies that can help lessen or eliminate damage from floodwater. And the final category was permanent flood protection, what most people would anticipate to be associated with adaptation. They would provide a primary line of defense to prevent floodwaters from impacting the low-lying inland areas of downtown. Some permanent flood protection measures will retrofit or raise existing shoreline features, whereas others will require construction of new protective features. Examples of permanent flood protection include walls, berms, elevated paths, raised planters, and elevated streets. This slide depicts examples of elevated streets, raised landscapes, and flood walls. And this slide depicts strategies such as elevating buildings, living shorelines, and temporary control measures, like a floodgate here for a door and sandbags. The focus area with the highest risk of flooding is Capitol Lake. The existing base flood elevation is 1 foot higher than that associated with the marine water tidal flooding. Before I move on, as you're aware, an environmental impact statement analysis is underway to consider the preferred long-term management strategy for Capitol Lake, or the Lower Deschutes watershed. And as I'm pretty sure you're aware, in March, the Department of Enterprise Services identified the estuary alternative as the likely preferred alternative. Per the environmental impact statement, the estuary, or the draft environmental impact statement, the estuary alternative would most benefit our adaptation to sea level rise. It would result in lowering the base flood elevation by 1 foot. It could, however, result in more frequent flooding of low-lying areas within Heritage Park itself. Regardless of the future of Capitol Lake, the eastern shoreline along Heritage Park will need to be modified in order to prevent future downtown flooding. Depending on the selected alternative, there would be only subtle differences in how the shoreline needs to be modified to address sea level rise. The Olympia Sea Level Rise Response Plan did acknowledge the potential for changes to Capitol Lake and provided adaptation strategies that could be considered with any or all alternatives. For each of the 4 focus areas, plan overviews were created, and I'll be going through those. The strategies for Capitol Lake included raising the existing wall, raising the path, and creating a landscape berm. These plans and the other plans you'll see are conceptual and will need to be refined in the design process. I'll go through these slides pretty quickly. I think you may be familiar with them, but I hope to give you an idea of what's being proposed for each focus area. One option for Capitol Lake is to construct new walls and a new pathway near the water. One option associated with this alternative would be to build a living shoreline. Where possible, we will construct living shorelines. It will help in obtaining funding and would provide a more natural environment. Another option would be to elevate the landscape and build a new berm and move the pathway further away from the water. Again, this option could integrate a living shoreline between the pathway and the lake. And then strategies for 68 inches of sea level rise would be similar, with the need to elevate the landscape, but may also include elevating 5th Avenue, Water Street, and part of 7th Avenue. In the long term, as I said, the strategies would be similar for 68 inches of sea level rise, similar to what they are for 24 inches of sea level rise. However, they would be higher. Again, we may have the opportunity to integrate living shorelines. As for Purcell Landing and the Isthmus, the variety of existing conditions and existing structures in these locations pose some of the greatest challenges to sea level rise adaptation. This is primarily due to existing structural constraints, including roadways and buildings. Greater variety of physical adaptation strategies will therefore need to be considered. In the plan, these included raised planter beds, floodgates, walls, berms, and elevated pathways. Examples of what this may look like for the Isthmus area are shown here. These are automatic floodgates as depicted along the roadways and access, and raised planter beds. One key thing that was considered in the sea level rise response plan was to maintain views and access for the public to the water.
Eric, quick question.
Yeah.
Well, for one, do you want questions as they come up?
Oh yeah, please do. And if,
Okay,
if somebody raises a hand, please let me know. Okay.
Could you go back to that last slide real quick?
Certainly.
I'm curious about Bayview and the things that are on the other side of the where we might put in raised planters and floodgates and stuff like that. What does the risk look like for them?
The risk is substantial and would happen fairly quickly. The sea level rise response plan did not take into account protection of private structures in that area or the protection of overwater structures. I think some of the things that were discussed in this area were the potential to swap land to allow the center of the isthmus to be redeveloped and these areas to be converted to park.
Okay, it's a one of the very few or maybe only grocery store downtown, so that's one of the reasons I flagged it.
Absolutely.
Hey, Eric, I had a question on that slide too. When you're talking about the raised planters and using that as I guess to hold back the water as it comes in flooding the area, those would probably have to be specially engineered planter walls to be able to hold that.
Yes, absolutely. They need to consider hydraulic pressures and may need to include sheet piling under the wall.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. That's kind of what I was thinking. So that kind of increases the construction costs as well.
Yeah, it may not be as simple as constructing a concrete planter. It may extend further into the ground.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Existing conditions along the majority of Purcell Landing and the isthmus shoreline is at an elevation below a tidal elevation of 18.1 feet. You may recall, and I think we showed in the last presentation, that in January we experienced a tide of 17.9 feet. So that's the closest we've come to marine flooding in decades. However, new portions or the newest portions of Purcell Landing were constructed 1 foot higher. Future phases will need to take those sea level rise into consideration also. Various concept plans were prepared for Purcell Landing. At 24 inches of sea level rise, one option was to simply construct a wall. Another considered a wall in combination with an elevated walkway in its existing location. This is similar to the most recent improvements at Purcell Landing. And a third considered simply raising the landscape, particularly within the park area, to essentially construct a very wide berm to hold back floodwaters. With 68 inches of sea level rise, the challenges along Purcell Landing and the isthmus become greater, just as they do elsewhere, and may need to include raising portions of 4th Avenue, Water Street, and Columbia Street. One concept for adapting to 68 inches sea level rise was to relocate the boardwalk further inland and construct a wall. This option may have the benefit of providing a living shoreline. Another option looked at constructing a wall and raising the boardwalk in its current location, similar to what was done in the previous phase of Purcell Landing. And yet another looked at raising the boardwalk as well as the adjacent landscape to provide a wider barrier to floodwaters. This image shows the concepts of raising streets. This is something similar to what was done in Miami Beach. And if you're interested, I can find you pictures of how they integrated that into the existing landscape. Flooding at the Port of Olympia comes later than other focus areas, and it becomes most pronounced at about 24 inches of sea level rise. Portions of the port were considered able to flood with current operations. Adaptation strategies for the port that were considered for the port included midterm strategies of installing backflow prevention, stormwater outfalls to prevent the backflow of water, raising the Billy Frank Jr. Trail and on East Bay and along North Point shore, and raising the North Point shoreline at KGY and Hearthfire. And then in the long term, the port considered the lifespan of the existing shipping berths and assumed that they would need to be rebuilt. Along with that, the marine terminal and cargo yards would be elevated too. This image depicts the concept of raising the Billy Frank Trail along East Bay and North Point shoreline. The trail itself does not become vulnerable to sea level rise until about 4 feet of sea level rise. As for the combined sewer system, the initial short-term strategies would be emergency response strategies, such as sealing catch basins to prevent water from getting to the butt inlet treatment plant. We will work in collaboration and coordination with LOT on that. And then in the midterm, building the shoreline protections that were depicted in previous slides to prevent overland flooding from inundating the combined system. In the long term, there may need to be additional flood storage provided at the treatment plant. And as I mentioned, the treatment plant is not vulnerable to flooding until 18 inches of sea level rise. Adaptation strategies that were considered in the sea level rise plan included raising the elevation of new facilities, which LOT has already begun to do, and which LOT staff will discuss at the end of this presentation. Then also the options of sandbagging, installing flood barriers at the entry wall, gaps in the entries to the wall around the treatment plant, and shoreline protection to prevent overland flooding. In the long term, as I mentioned in the previous slide, there may need to be additional flood storage and pumping capacity. The costs for adaptation developed in the plan were high level and preliminary. The costs focused on the physical strategies that I've just shown, and did not include life cycle costs to rebuild or replace portions of the port, boardwalks, and docks. As seen here, the cost to protect downtown from flooding and sea level rise due to sea level rise will be substantial. However, the cost of inaction would be far greater. Costs shown here are for near-term, mid-term, and long-term strategies for each of the focus areas. If you're interested, Chapter 9 of the Sea Level Rise Response Plan presents a breakdown for the individual physical strategies you've just seen. The costs depicted here are, please note, in 2018 dollars. We've recently seen fairly significant inflation. So one thing that is fortunate is that the costs to implement the strategies will fortunately be spread out over decades and will provide us with some time to plan. The costs will need to be shared by collaborative members and the community. A variety of funding mechanisms may be required to implement the physical strategies, and funding may come from a mix of federal, state, county and city sources, as I will discuss in the next few slides. The Sea Level Rise Response Plan envisioned a finance group or committee that would be responsible for developing, investigating, and implementing long-term public financing mechanisms to generate funding for adaptation, as well as investigating and pursuing funding opportunities. This group will be key to the success of sea level rise adaptation. We're talking about, as you saw, significant expenditures and determining how the costs are to be shared amongst the collaborative members and the community will be critical. The collaborators interlocal agreement assumed this group would be an ad hoc group that advised the executive committee. That may need to be reconsidered. Another model may be something like the Capital Lake Deschutes Estuary Funding and Governments Work Group. If you're not familiar with it, there was an Olympia sea level rise funding issue paper provided as an appendix in the sea level rise response plan. It identified several sources for funding, including grant and loan opportunities, as well as a flood district and utility rates. I'll discuss each of these very briefly in the next few slides. The Corps of Engineers has a civil works program that assists communities in developing and implementing solutions to problems, including flood risk management, ecosystem restoration, and emergency operations. Projects could include both structural flood protection measures like levees and walls, and non-structural measures like flood warning systems. The Corps traditionally funds these projects at 65% of the cost, and leaving the remaining 35% as a match for local entities, as well as ongoing operation and maintenance of whatever infrastructure is built. One thing to note is that projects funded through the Corps need to be authorized by Congress. FEMA has, or the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA has several programs that provide funding to reduce the risks of flooding and other natural disasters. The Pre-Disaster Mitigation Program, which is a grant program, makes federal funds available to plan and implement measures that would reduce the risk from future hazards, including flooding. It provides funding for both mitigation projects and planning activities. The Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grant program provides help to communities prepare for natural disasters, including flooding. Otherwise known as BRIC, it provides funds annually for hazard mitigation planning and projects. That comes up in the fall each year. FEMA also, through the BRIC program, can provide non-financial direct technical assistance. That helps communities develop mitigation programs and submit mitigation applications and implement the projects to reduce the risk from natural hazards. Support for this program, however, is competitive and can be provided for up to 3 years. I think this is something that we should pursue. FEMA's Flood Mitigation Assistance Program funds flood mitigation projects and planning that with the aim of reducing or eliminating claims under the National Flood Insurance Program. So this applies to properties that are currently within the floodplain and vulnerable. To get funding through any of these programs, we need to competitively apply with the Washington State Department of Ecology that administrates the programs, or at least the funding of the programs. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Coastal Resilient Grant Program is a program jointly administered by NOAA and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. It helps fund activities that improve a community's ability to prepare and absorb impacts of and or adapt to extreme weather events and climate related hazards. It also funds, and I believe it has a requirement for habitat restoration as part of that program. Grants typically range from about $250,000 to $1 million and require that projects are constructed within 3 years. Local jurisdictions are typically required to match approximately 1/3 of the cost. Ecology has several funding opportunities. Their flood control assistance account program provides funding for floodplain planning and maintenance, feasibility studies, and requires and can be used for cash matches for federal projects. Ecology's Floodplain by Design program funds hazard reduction programs that have multiple benefits. The program offers funding for projects that provide benefits beyond flood protection for things like salmon recovery, habitat restoration, and water quality improvements. I believe, particularly around Capitol Lake, projects would be eligible for this. Then Ecology also has the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program that provides grants and low interest loans for projects that include things like non-point source pollution control and certain green projects, of which living shorelines may benefit. That is kind of the end of opportunities for grants and loans. But then there is the possibility of flood control zone districts. The RCW authorizes the formation of flood control zones to help fund flood reduction projects. A flood control district, would allow for those properties most vulnerable to sea level rise to participate in the cost of adaptation. A flood control district is formed at the county level by a vote of the county commissioners. Its boundaries are subject to the review by the county's boundary review board. The RCW allows for a non-voted levy of up to 50 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. And with voter approval for excess levies, that could raise the value to $5.90 per $1,000 of assessed value. I think maybe one thing to note there is that that $5.90 includes the cumulative all taxing districts within an area. Another consideration for funding is the city's storm and surface water utility, as well as Lot Clean Water Alliance utility funds. When considering the use of utility funding, however, it's important to establish a nexus between the amounts charged to customers and the benefits they may receive. Because the utilities are not material contributors to sea level rise, the benefits of funding would need to be quantified to justify that funding. Potential physical adaptation projects that may be eligible would include the consolidation of stormwater systems and outfalls and the construction of stormwater pumping stations, as well as separation of stormwater from the combined sewer system to help protect the Bud Inlet treatment plant and build capacity. That's pretty much it for funding. I did want to give you an update on some of the work plan items we've been working on. We're currently underway with the construction of the Fiddlehead Outfall Tide Gate. This project is a collaboration with the Lot Clean Water Alliance. The new tide gate should be installed next week at low tide. This is something we've been looking at for a few years. We've had some maintenance problems there, and this is important to protect particularly areas in the vicinity of Olympia supply, or I'd say the area around between Legion and 7th Avenue around Columbia Street. So it'll be nice. Next time we meet, we can probably provide you some photos and let you know about a successful project being completed. As I've mentioned before, we've ordered tide gauge equipment. There have been a number of supply chain issues related with that. The latest estimate is that we should receive those or have those delivered on August 22nd, at which time the city will be working with the port to install that at the marine terminal. That'll provide us with online real-time tidal data, along with some water quality information that can help us track how predicted tides are compared to actual tide elevations. I think you are aware, or we've discussed in the past, that barometric pressure and storm systems can have significant impacts on tidal elevations. And I think I mentioned last time that in January at the high tide event on January 7th, we saw a tide that came in 18 inches higher than was predicted at a very inopportune moment when the Deschutes River was peaking. We also have purchased what I've said are catch basin covers. These are like giant refrigerator magnets that can be placed on catch basin lids to prevent inundation of the combined sewer system and prevent overwhelming the Bud Inlet treatment plant. We've also worked to develop or refine our downtown flood maps. And we haven't done it yet, but we plan to provide markings on the ground in Heritage Park to indicate the locations where sandbags need to be deployed. We've had challenges with that in the past. The city of Olympia has also begun looking at revisions to its comprehensive plan, and in the environmental chapter, sea level rise will be integrated into it. And with that, I will turn it over to Matt Kennelly with the Lot Clean Water Alliance to discuss work plan progress. They've been
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah.
Yeah, Matt Kennelly, Assistant Executive Director of LOT, and wanted to share with you our work plan progress. And just going by the different items listed in the work plan, I'll give you some updates here. So the first one is incorporating sea level rise into other planning efforts. So we have our master planning process going on now through 2050. As we look at our future, we're incorporating all of these concepts and things that Eric's been mentioning and into our and into our master planning process. So that's how we're laying out our facilities. That includes storm intensity and duration with our consultant that we're using to project what our flows will be in the future. We're making sure that those models are updated for the current values. The second is incorporating sea level rise into capital planning. So we have a few projects that we elevate in priority because of the high peak flows. One is our influent pump station capacity. That's just this critical point where all of the wastewater flow first enters the treatment plant, and we need to boost it up in order to get it to flow by gravity through most of the rest of the treatment plant to go through the processes. So this is such a critical point. Right now, we're going to look at our capacity here and see what upgrades are needed. So we just kicked off that effort recently. The north outfall is different than Fiddlehead. This is our main outfall out to the north into Butt Inlet, and it has a hydraulic restriction in an area of the port property. So we've collaborated with port staff, and we're working on some early preliminary designs to upsize a portion of that pipe so we can get more capacity out of our pump station that feeds that line. This is after the treatment occurs. And the last is treatment plant emergency power improvements, just looking at where those critical areas are, primarily pumping throughout the plant, and make sure that emergency power upgrades keep up with the age of the equipment or the capacity that we need. And next slide, please, Eric. And then Eric mentioned on January 7th that high tide event. The night before that, with all of that heavy rain, is really where we felt it. So we had a lot of hands on deck to try to ride operations through that storm on January 6th. And we learned a lot. We continue to refine our approaches. Not only have we repurposed former treatment basins as storage capacity to buffer out that storm flow, but we took a look at our responses and how we did in that January 6th event and adjusted some gates and valves and other things that are better adapted into some higher flow situations. When valves may operate and gates may operate at a great point right now in the summer, that may need to be adjusted just slightly to accommodate flows in higher event times. We purchased some spare equipment and parts to be able to respond more quickly, and also reviewed hydraulic bottlenecks that had occurred and what we can do about that. And the last item is floodproofing sensitive facilities. The two items here, we always look in our capital projects to verify base elevations. When new equipment or concrete pads or any part of our plant is touched, we're cross-checking against those flood elevations. And one of the example of that actually is a new fence that we're building around the perimeter of the treatment plant. So we looked at one area and said, well, actually, if we put the fence on a stub wall, that would accomplish both goals. So we did that, as well as working on acquiring some sandbagging equipment and supplies so we can more readily respond. We're still in close collaboration with the city on responses like that, as far as those mats that Eric mentioned, but having a ready stash of sand on hand with sandbagging equipment will allow us to block those critical areas from flooding. And that's the latest from our end.
Thank you, Matt. And that's the end of what I had we had in terms of a presentation. I just wanted to remind you that our next meeting is set for November 4th at noon. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much. Leetta or Bob, do you have any questions on the presentation?
That's an awful lot. You guys have a lot going on there. That's really impressive work. I feel a bit like the old mule who snuck into the thoroughbred barn and is trying to hope nobody notices, because you guys are way ahead of me on all of this. You guys are really on top of this. So I don't really have any questions. I just want to say I'm really impressed with the work you're doing.
Leetta?
Well, Bob, I just want to make note, you did ask about the engineering of the concrete planters, so I think you're in the right space. So I feel comfortable with the lot update as I serve on lot, so I feel a little bit more comfortable. I think everything is coming together well, and I think Bob and I are catching on. It's a lot to digest, but it gives me a lot more confidence seeing the preparation, seeing how everything ties in together. And so I look forward to continuing to learn and being at these meetings and contributing.
Excellent. And, you know, part of the goal today was to help brief the newer members on, you know, work that's led up to today. And so if there are any, if there's any like future agenda topics that you all want to propose now or whenever, you can email me in terms of something you'd like to dig into more, just let me know, and we can make sure that that's ready for you. You know, otherwise we'll be getting updates on this work moving forward. And man, just hearing about all the work that went into responding to that major flooding event. I'm going to be thinking about y'all next time it's like raining pretty hard outside, and how many people are down there on the ground, like protecting the infrastructure. It is a lot of work, and very grateful for it.
I have one quick question. I'm curious now. What do you suppose the general population in the city of Olympia, do they realize the significant impact that sea level rise could have on the downtown area? Is the general public aware of this?
I'd say the general public, for the most part, is aware of it. The city of Olympia has been working on sea level rise since about 1990. I think at the time everybody was thinking it was crazy, but we've held regular updates to the community. There's a good deal of interest and participation in the work we've done. Initially there were a great number of naysayers, and that is not the case any longer. People recognize that this is real and that we have significant vulnerabilities that'll need to be addressed.
Yeah, one of the first public meetings that I attended when I was in undergrad at Evergreen was down at the Olympia Center, and it was about sea level rise, and that was a full house there. I think people are by and large aware that sea level rise is happening and downtown is vulnerable. I think a good amount, but not everyone, is aware that the city has a plan in place. And like Eric said, you know, there have been naysayers in the past, but I think once people understand the alternative, which is either for everything to get flooded or to spend considerably more money trying to move all of the infrastructure, including lots, that we actually have landed in a very good place.
Yeah, well, that's good, because I was just thinking that, you know, if one of the funding opportunities is a tax levy, that would have to include a lot of education for people to be comfortable with that. So just curious where that was. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and Bob, just to be clear, that would be a flood control zone district. So it would be limited to those areas that are vulnerable to flooding. I would say, I would like to add, if you don't mind, once we start talking money, that's when we're really going to need to get people on board with sea level rise and the urgent need to protect downtown. So that finance group will be key to understanding that and meeting out those costs.
All right. Anything else? Leetta, Bob, or any staff?
I'm golden. Happy Friday.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. Thanks for adjusting to this new meeting time too. And I know I myself prefer to get things out of the way during a lunch hour than taking up another evening. We'll meet next on November 4th at this same time. And thank you all so much. I'll call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you.